Hey Josh, welcome to the Hidden Why podcast. Great to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, Lee.
Thanks for taking the time out of your day. You got a busy day, probably coming to the end of your day there.
Yeah, it's been Zoomtastic today.
Hmm? A lot of Zoom calls.
A lot of Zoom calls, but
Right.
that's the way things are these days.
You're an expert in the emotional intelligence field, yeah?
Well, I always worry when I hear that word expert
Expert.
because I have some challenges with it, but I'm working on it.
Well, leader in the field. You've spent how many years have you spent in this area of research?
25 years full
Here you
time,
go.
and several years before that as a teacher in a school where emotional intelligence was one of our central pillars.
Mm.
And so I've been doing this for a little bit, and I feel like sometimes I have the hang of it.
More of an expert than most of us probably listening here. That's good. That's good. And you've got an organization that did you help set that up? The 6seconds.org.
Yeah, I'm one of the one of the co-founders of 6 Seconds, and we got started in 97 to answer the question of how do you actually use emotional intelligence and how do you develop it.
Mm.
And what happened was Dan Goleman, who wrote the book in 1995, he'd come to the school that I mentioned where I was teaching. And he said, wow, this is a model of how you teach this. And he wrote a whole chapter in his book about it. And then people started calling us saying, well, this book is fantastic, but how do you do it? And that's why we created 6 Seconds, was to show people how.
Okay. So you went from teaching the emotional intelligence to doing this full time, helping, I guess, a more larger global audience.
Yeah, well, the truth is, Lee, that I was not teaching it before. I
Yeah.
thought when we started, I thought I was going to be doing the kind of back office stuff. my, I was working on products and being the operations manager, and
Yeah.
that's where my comfort zone was, and to some degree still is. But I think I needed to learn this stuff, and that's what really brought me into it. And particularly when I became a parent, but also as the organization's grown and I'm trying to learn to be a leader of a global organization, I've needed to find some new acumen. Hence the uncomfortable with the word expert.
All right. Okay. So tell us about 6 seconds. What's the organization all about?
Well, as I said, we're here to increase emotional intelligence in the world. We research what works and we disseminate that through certification trainings. We work in every sector. We have people in big corporations and tiny little businesses, community organizations, nonprofits, schools, prisons, militaries, healthcare, kind of everywhere. Everywhere that there are people, we need these skills.
Mm.
And we have certified practitioners in 150 countries. And through our project with UNICEF World Children's Day, we bring emotional intelligence skills to kids in 200 countries and territories. So it's pretty widespread at this
Yeah.
point, but we have a lot more work to do.
A lot more work to do. So, why is this such important work? I suppose maybe we need to first start at what is EQ or emotional intelligence, and how does that separate from, I guess, what I grew up with is IQ? What's your actual
Hmm.
intelligence? Um, where do we start?
Yeah, me too. Even when I studied psychology, I didn't really learn about emotions. And I think few of us have really gotten an opportunity to find out what do these things really mean. I mean, we have them. And I think in most places in the world, the sort of stories, oh, okay, those emotion things, some of them are nice, but let's just try to ignore those. And that's, I guess, emotional stupidity, which is sort of the opposite of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Uh, the simple definition is being smarter with feelings.
Okay.
We have
What's the
them.
difference between a feeling and an emotion? Same, same?
Okay, getting into some deep waters now. I don't know that I care. Like this is both. This is a felt experience. You've got this sensation, but technically, an emotion is an automatic physiological response. It happens almost instantaneously. We're continuously producing emotion chemicals They last in our brains and bodies for about 6 seconds. These chemicals go flowing through our bloodstream. They affect every living cell in the human body. It's part of our regulatory system. And then they
So
start to
that's the
kind of soak
emotion.
in. That's the emotion, yeah.
And six
And then
seconds, you
they,
say, obviously a link there with the company, huh?
you got it.
How do you know
Yeah,
it's 6 seconds? How do you know it's
well, Candace Pert, who was the chief of brain science at the National Institutes of Health back when, was one of our original advisory board members. And Candace is the one who shared this with us, that when she was studying the neurobiology of emotion, she found they lasted in the brain and body for 4 to 7 seconds. So we settled on 6.
okay? Interesting.
So emotion is that immediate reaction. And then these emotions start to work on us and we feel them.
Yeah.
Right. And in English, I know you spent time in Japan. In Japanese, they don't use the same word. In many languages, they don't use the same word. But in English, we feel feelings. We feel things are hot. We feel they're sharp. We feel angry. We feel sad. There's a physical sensation. And that happens because these emotions start to work on us, work on our brains and bodies. And they change all of our muscular systems, our digestive systems, our immune systems, our thinking, our vision. Like they change what we look at, they change what we hear. Emotions are at a kind of base level regulating the human organism to cope with life. And so we get the emotion and then it turns into a feeling as we start to process it.
Can we get an emotion without having the consequent feeling? Do you think? Like, can we have an internal, stress reaction or something that perhaps we're not noticing, or something that does something to our digestive system without noticing the feeling?
So I think there's two things there. One is this is happening all the time and we don't notice it.
Right.
Right. We're continuously regulating ourselves, just like you might not notice that sometimes your heart rate increases or decreases. Right? Or sometimes your breathing gets more or less shallow. And then you're like, wait, I'm kind of out of breath. Like, oh, what's going on? Right? So all this regulatory stuff is happening in the background. The other piece of that, though, is we can hold on to and struggle with emotions and we can get kind of caught up in it and it gets big and messy. And we're probably paying much more attention to it then. Other times, it's just kind of going with the flow.
Yeah. Now we're going to get into talking about purpose and how emotional intelligence can help us with finding our purpose. But as far as the purpose of emotions go, do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, and it's actually linked. Emotions are signals that help us pay attention to and energize us to deal with the opportunities and threats that we perceive. So the purpose of emotion is to help us navigate through opportunities and threats, many of which are social, by the way, because we're social animals.
Yeah.
And so we've got these little nudges kind of going, hey, pay attention to this. Get energy for this. Deal with this. Some of those are big, right? And we start having these big feelings. And I don't believe they're negative and positive feelings. We have these big feelings. These big feelings are telling us you're noticing something big. So in other words, when we have a lot of feeling, it's telling us we're perceiving something important. Sound like purpose.
Yeah.
Right? So there's the link, is that emotions are here to help us notice and handle, navigate, engage with what's important. And purpose is a big part of what's important.
And the emotion is how we feel, and that's a big part of how well we navigate that purpose, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, so there's some really intriguing research about purpose and this idea, do we find purpose or not?
Yeah.
And what I think actually happens is we start to grow a sense of purpose around what we're committed to. And as we work on something and we start to feel more deeply and think more deeply and engage more deeply, it starts to feel more purposeful. And so purpose is probably something we make more than find. And
it comes around in a circle, doesn't it, really? Like if you think about the emotion creating the feeling to help you find that purpose. And I guess the more aligned you are with that purpose, that will change the kind of emotions that get being produced there.
Yeah, sometimes emotions researchers talk about moral emotions. And I mean, people give feelings like shame and guilt a really bad
Yeah.
rap,
Mm.
but they're moral emotions. We feel social shame. There's different kinds of shame, but we feel social shame. We're like, and you lived in Japan, you've seen this very firsthand. Like, people feel shame when they're not aligned with the group. And that social shame is a moral emotion that catalyzes us to maybe go along more with the group norms,
Right.
which can be extreme in some cultures, like Japan, where it can be really paralyzing for people. Like, I can't be myself because this is so strong. But at the other extreme, I live in the US where we seem to have a need for some more shame.
For some what? Some more shame.
More shame. Yeah.
Right.
We have, for example, political leaders, not to name any names, but political leaders who do things that are really horrible and then seem to feel no shame about it,
Mm.
even when they're caught. Even when it's a bald-faced lie, and people are like, you lied. Yeah, well, okay. And that's that lack of shame or guilt or remorse. Uh, we kind of lose an important regulatory function for the individual and society.
Yeah. It's finding that balance then, huh?
Yes.
So pretty important that we teach emotional intelligence and I suppose not only talk about what it is, but how we can use it to improve our performance. And I guess those people that we're living with or surrounded by or work with.
Yeah, and this is the fantastic news is that these are learnable,
Yeah.
measurable skills.
Are they teaching it at
And
schools well enough over there in the States?
not enough. Uh, there's some great examples near you on the Sunshine Coast. There's
Mm.
some great examples in a lot of countries. There's some in the U.S.,
Yeah.
but not enough. And I think what's happening is we're not keeping up with the deluge. Right? We've got this kind of tsunami of stress and complexity hitting us at work, at home, and for kids, it's really brutal. And I think we are trying to avoid thinking about how difficult it is right now, but it's really brutal. And we're not, it's like the challenge is getting bigger and our skills aren't getting bigger fast enough.
Mm. We need to do more.
Yeah, or do less of some other things,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think we're deeply entrenched right now in outsourcing our own wellness to social media. How many likes did you get tells you something about who you really are, which it doesn't, or how valuable you are, which it doesn't. And these algorithms are teaching us. They're training. We're not training the algorithms. The algorithms are training us, and they're training us to be more reactive and more superficial.
Mm.
And I don't think social media is the cause of all evil, and technology. We wouldn't be here doing this right now without technology. I think there's good ways to use it, but again, we've got to keep up with the reality that we're living in, and that means we need a lot more skills for complexity.
Mm.
And I'm sure you're seeing this in Australia as well. Loneliness is at an all-time high in the recorded history of loneliness. Stress is at an all-time high. Mental health crises, particularly for young people. People 16 to 25 are facing levels of suicide and depression and anxiety that are unheard of. And all of these things need more. We need more emotional skills. And in the workplace, just the work from home and hybrid and all that complexity, there's just so much happening that's stressing our relational systems. And I feel a tremendous urgency to grow more capabilities for us to deal with the world we're living in.
So learning the tools to navigate our emotions, will help us in this new world, I suppose, we're living in, where we're really always stuck behind screens. I mean, I've been looking into a lot of screen time activity recently, and I use my phone for work and I'm on it quite a bit. But I know there's a lot of people that don't do it for that purpose, but they're still on it for quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can those same tools be applied, whether it's in the tech world or outside external world, or is there different tools now that you're sort of coming across around navigating emotions? Because I imagine, I mean, for our generation, we didn't have that technology. So we had to learn that emotional intelligence for many, many years. Now we've got it. So we've got to try and blend the two. Whereas some of the
Mm-hmm.
new generations, they've been behind those screens the whole life, you know?
I was talking to my older kid about this, and whether you could create meaningful connection through text messages or digitally. And they said they feel like their relationships through text are very honest, very meaningful, and in some ways better than their relationships through in-person interaction.
Interesting. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, not for me, but I'm I'm
You're
a
old
little
school.
older, right? So I think it's important to consider that, somebody who's 23, as you said, may have a very different relationship with technology. And
Yeah, I wonder if, because if you're behind the screens, and there would be this social awkwardness, wouldn't there be created if you're not having those social interactions, which we're all about? And perhaps it's more because you've got this protection of a screen rather than face to face. You're a bit more vulnerable, I feel, and your whole body is exposed with another whole body. If that makes sense.
yeah, absolutely. So our social brain becomes more activated when we're in person.
Right.
So if we kind of think of a continuum from like a text message to a phone call, remember those, to a Zoom meeting, to in person, or maybe VR might be the next, and then in person. And our social brain becomes increasingly activated in those, and our filters, which again, things like shame are quite helpful in preventing us from, doing sort of horrible things. Like people say things in text they would never say in person,
Mm.
right? And that's that social brain has not activated enough to go, wait a minute, there's a real person there. I don't want to say something mean,
Yeah.
right? So there is there's more of that social brain activation, and I think that brings with it a richness and an intensity, and that is also uncomfortable sometimes.
Mm.
I'm finding it harder to be like, after a couple of years of mostly being at home. I was at a conference recently, and I found it exhausting to be around so many people.
There you go.
And I'm like, wow, I've kind of lost the muscle, lost the fitness of social engagement.
Well, the energy that you must use, and I think about this all the time, and it was brought up to me from a colleague that observes my daily interactions with people. I'm always talking with people, and always dealing with people's situations, And at the end of the day, the last thing I want to do is go out and socialize generally, because most of my days that. And she was like, well, hang on, most of your days like that. So, and I thought about it, and I thought the amount of energy the brain uses, and the amount more it must use with interacting with people, and it must use that social part of our brain quite intensively, that must just drain you. So I imagine, from like sitting at home for 2 years not exercising, then suddenly going out for a walk would be just like, sitting at home for 2 years and suddenly going out to a conference. Quite
Yeah.
overwhelming. Mm.
Yeah. So there's a term called emotional labor that was developed in the 70s, and it was originally popularized around gender equity and looking at how jobs that are frequently were done by women had a particular form of labor involved,
Yeah.
and that labor of caring, that labor of social interaction. And so this emotional labor term was popularized. And I like the term a lot, just thinking about, well, what is the work in the interaction? And if we're doing emotional labor, We are. Right now, we're doing emotional labor, right? We're trying to find this points of connection and understand each other and kind of looking at each other. And it's fun and it's work.
Hmm.
And so that emotional labor is something that I think we can train for and
Right.
practice for.
Right. Is that kind of what you teach? I mean, you
Yeah,
must
so
have a whole
the
bunch of different tools that you teach.
yes, tons. And the starting point for me is to stop vilifying, stop talking about negative emotions, stop treating emotions as something distracting or disruptive, and instead to say, what if all of these feelings are actually valuable?
Hmm.
And for me, that was hard for me because I was very uncomfortable with feelings. And I didn't like, when somebody was upset, I didn't like to ask people how they were feeling. It's like, I don't want to open that box. And what I've learned is that when you open the box, instead of like making this big mess, it turns out that's key to moving forward, addressing what's real. And by the way, it builds trust, builds connection, builds a sense of teamwork.
Yeah.
So I've
So you
come to
think
see,
by, sorry, sharing our feelings is paramount?
well, sometimes
Hmm.
there are people who overshare,
Yeah.
right? And I remember I was working with the U.S. Marine Corps on emotional intelligence at one point, and this Marine said to me, "I'm not going to ask my guys if how they're feeling before I tell them to storm a hill." I'm like, no, that would not be emotionally intelligent, right? It's emotional intelligence doesn't mean we delve into every emotion. It means we pay attention and we are smart about it.
Selective. Hmm.
But if you tell your guys to storm the hill and you have no idea how they're feeling, that's dumb. That's dangerous. Right? So you need to be aware of this and you need to handle it in a way that's functional. But
Yeah.
let's do it at the right time.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of managers say, I don't have time for this people stuff. Do they say that in Australia also?
Probably. Yeah.
Probably. And I, I get that because as a CEO, there are a lot of days where I'm like, please don't nobody tell me how they're feeling today. But what I've come to learn is that if I don't engage with my feelings and other people's feelings today, I'm going to be engaging with them tomorrow. And tomorrow it's going to be harder. They don't
Hmm.
just go away. They get more intense, more complex, usually.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do we start to understand, I suppose, our intelligence first?
Mm,
And that's where we'd start, I guess. So we can then better understand ours. We can then better understand
yep,
others by doing that.
absolutely. So I think going first is absolutely the way to go because if we haven't tuned in and come to understand emotions and engage with them, they're very confusing.
Yeah.
And so learning some emotional vocabulary, starting to, as I said, just starting to kind of see, oh, this is something valuable. That's interesting. I wonder what's going on here. And that curiosity to get the data, right? So all intelligence, we could talk about math, language, all intelligence is accurately acquiring the data and then using it to effectively solve problems. That's the dictionary definition of intelligence.
Right.
So for emotional intelligence, let's accurately get the data. We call that know yourself at 6 seconds. Tuning in, getting this information, coming to see what am I feeling? How am I reacting? Okay, this is pushing me this way. This is pushing me that way. I have these multiple feelings at the same time. Let me sort them out. Okay, so that's know yourself. And then step two, do I have any options? Like I'm reacting in this way. I'm uncomfortable with this. I'm impatient about that. I'm excited about this, whatever. Do I have options?
Mm.
And can I pause and go, okay, wait a minute. What are some different ways that I can handle this? And that's about moving out of the automatic reaction. and into a more intentional response.
Right. So you need a bit of some level of self-awareness then to firstly be able to recognize or pause even, so you
Yeah,
can see
for
the
about
emotions that you're feeling.
6 seconds.
About 6 seconds, yeah.
So we have a model that we put in a circle,
Yeah. That's
and
on
the
your
blue,
website, is it?
yeah,
Yeah.
and on 6seconds.org. And the blue part, know yourself. It's blue for like reflecting pool in water and noticing, okay, what's happening. And then, as you just said, red is for stop. But wait a second. I'm reacting this way. Do I have any other options? How is this working or not?
Mm.
And then the part that we really need to talk about is the green part, because the green part is the go or grow. And that's about where do I really want to go? I've stopped, I'm out of reaction, and now I'm going to step forward. But what's going to guide me in stepping forward if it's not autopilot?
Yeah.
Do do do. You know the answer?
No, tell me.
Yeah, you do. Purpose.
Oh, so okay. Yes, sure.
Right? Because when we're moving out of this unconscious automatic reaction, we say, okay, what's really important? What do I want to move toward? So in this green part, self-direction, or we call it give yourself, there's two competencies. One is increasing empathy, and the other is pursuing noble goals. And those two things combine to give us a radar and to say, okay, I want to move in this direction.
Mm.
And I'm going to harness my emotions to help me move there.
Okay. So if we have a level of self-awareness first, we've come to a point where we're feeling something, the emotions, but before we just react to them, we then look at them and go, okay, well, hang on, which way am I going? The purpose, I guess, is you're talking about.
First that stop,
Yeah.
and then the purpose as a direction.
Yeah. So empathy and noble goals is purpose.
Yeah.
What's the part of
And
empathy?
so in our team in China was struggling with translating these words, and they came up with, but I don't speak Chinese, but what they told me is the characters they use literally mean connecting beyond yourself. And I thought that was a beautiful way to describe this give yourself area,
Yeah.
because empathy connects us kind of laterally, right? It helps us be in community. And it's not just empathize. It's not me saying, "Oh, Lee, I get how you're feeling," right? That's kind of
Yeah.
a one-way thing.
Mm.
It's a mutuality.
So rather than just sort of the selfish sort of purpose or noble goals, we're actually combining that with, okay, we're going towards this, but what's the connection with everyone else? Yeah.
Yes. And that, I think, is it just unleashes something
Mm.
in our leadership, in our family life, in our community life, in our personal relationships, just inside ourselves as individuals, when we can feel that sense of connection and feel that sense of purpose working together.
Okay. What tools do you have for us there? I
So,
guess
I mean,
maybe we could start with a couple of tools in each section there, like the self-awareness. Do you guide people to do a meditation or anything like that to help them with that?
yeah, I mean, not to be like commercial and crass here, but I do recommend that people take an emotional intelligence assessment, and ours is fantastic. And so, if you want to really understand where you are in this, a key part of that self awareness,
Yeah.
the emotional intelligence assessment will help you.
That's on your website there.
Yep, absolutely. The other big piece in this know yourself part is just growing your vocabulary. And if people go to the website, in the top menu, there's a get started learning about emotional intelligence
Yeah,
menu.
got it.
And there's some free tools there. And one of them is the interactive emotion wheel, which is super cool because you can click around on different feelings and understand what they mean. And again, I told you I was uncomfortable with feelings, and I spent most of my life avoiding them. Well, I don't know if that's true anymore. Now it's been 25 years of doing this. Still, okay, the majority of my life before doing this, I was avoiding them. And just kind of getting some of the logic of feelings and going, okay, these actually, I can make sense of this. I can be,
Mm.
people will say, like, well, let's just be rational. Okay, let's be rational and understand that emotions are part of how we work. And let's figure them out. So that really helped me, just building my vocabulary and kind of go, okay, I get what disappointment means. I get what frustration actually means.
Mm.
I get what anxiety means.
Okay.
And I get what trust and joy mean too.
Well, I guess it makes sense. You need to understand what the emotions are to understand what you're experiencing. I guess
Yes.
puts it into better understanding. Yeah. So that tool's
And Lee,
available on your website there, is it?
just that thing you just said, that's emotional intelligence, right? Like, oh, I'm feeling something and now I understand it.
Hmm.
I have a label for it. I get what's going on. You just used your emotional intelligence to connect those dots.
Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha. So website full of information here.
Yeah, we've tons of articles and resources and case studies and a huge network of consultants and coaches and facilitators all over the world. So people who want to dig into this, you can really enjoy the website. And there's lots there for free. We're a nonprofit, and we're here to advocate and share. And this whole curriculum I mentioned for kids, the pop-up festival, it's all free. And then, if you want to go deeper in your company, in your own life, in your school, we can help you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. So when you had this level of knowing yourself and choosing yourself, what particularly goes wrong after that, as far as proceeding with how you're feeling?
So I remember talking to one of my students about this way back, and she said to me, "Well, okay, I understand what I'm feeling, but I don't have any choice about it."
Mm.
And I mean, I was teaching, she was 14 at the time. I'm very curious. I should try to find her now and ask her if she still feels that way. But I think a lot of us have this sense that emotions just happen to us and somehow it's out of our control.
Mm.
Emotions are automatic, but that doesn't mean we have no choice. Just for example, if I don't sleep very much and I, stay out late drinking, which I don't really do anymore, but if I did, the next day I would be cranky, right? And
Yeah.
then I'd say, well, Lee, it's just an automatic reaction. Like, well, Josh, no, you chose to stay out late drinking and not sleep, and now you're cranky. That's not automatic. That was your choice.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So we kind of set up the conditions in which these reactions happen. But we also, even if I react in a particular way, I still have choice about what happens next.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, as masterful as you might be, you'll still have an emotional that will trigger something that will make you react. And you then have to, like the kids sometimes, and I just go, why did I react like that? But I did. But at least I can sit back and reflect and go, okay, well, this is what's happened, and maybe I can do this better next time.
How old are your kids?
They're now 7 and 10.
Oh my goodness, that's a wonderful age.
They're pretty
And
good kids.
some challenges.
Yeah.
They're great. Kids are great emotional intelligence trainers.
Hmm.
They give you a ton of feedback,
Yeah.
by like throwing a tantrum or yelling at you, or like, you're like, okay, I'm going to build a connection here. I'm going to have a conversation, and you try something and it doesn't work. You get a lot of feedback really quickly and go, okay, I'll try it differently tomorrow.
Yeah. 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 Spot on. No, it's they're very good for that. Taught me a lot. Do you yeah, I suppose what advice, like final advice, would you give people around this emotional intelligence and how better to use it to discover themselves and others?
So emotions don't come forward with a big banner and say, this is what I mean. Like whether they're our own emotions or our kids, or our colleagues, employees, spouses, mother-in-laws, right?
Mm.
The emotion's there and we can start to sense it, and it's giving us a little nudge. And I think that engaging with curiosity and saying, okay, this is here for a reason. I wonder what's going on. I wonder what's going on for me. I wonder what's going on for my kid. And that place of respectful curiosity, as opposed to dismissing and saying, oh, this person's crazy, or, my kid's being a jerk. Like, I don't know, hopefully we don't do that very often, but I think we've all been there where we're like dismissing or even demeaning other people, and
Mm.
instead, or ourselves, and instead saying, okay, this is happening for a reason. Let me explore this. Let me be curious about, there's something meaningful and I want to understand it.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, again, it's just taking that time to reflect. And you sort of talked about the rational mindset and, the stoic approach to life, maybe. Within
Yeah,
all
we've
that,
had,
there is a rational, it's very sensible to be rational about your emotions.
we have, I think, a strong history in Western thought of dismissing emotions. And, sometimes both in the US and Australia, you'll hear phrases like, oh, man up. And,
Oh, absolutely.
that
Yeah.
means ignore what you're feeling,
Yeah.
right? And I think there's a kind of dangerous way we've kind of intermingled masculinity and strength with a lack of compassion and self-compassion.
Mm.
And I don't think that serves us well in the world today. So if we
Do you think
can,
there's a balance bar? Like, do you think we've sort of gone
sure.
from one polar to too much the other way now, where we're allowing people to be too sensitive and too emotional and feely, touchy, like,
Well, I live in California, so I mean, no, I think sometimes people are too self absorbed, but that's not the same as being compassionate in a meaningful way towards self and others. And unfortunately, I think in the world we haven't gotten very far in deeply respecting people as people, and
yeah,
that their unique experience is meaningful, irrespective of their age, gender, race, orientation, where they live, how they think, how tall they are, like whatever. We have all these biases that prevent us from of really valuing one another. And I think that sort of phrases like "man up" are tools that we've used to disconnect ourselves
yeah.
and to diminish and demean people and or ourselves. And so, if we really want a respectful relationship with human beings, I think we need a lot more caring, and emotions are part of that. Emotions help us
Yeah.
care and respect and engage.
Do you find? I mean, there's obviously two camps of people. The one that says, that just lives by that because maybe that was their upbringing, hard enough. Maybe they're very, I don't know if it's low level of emotional intelligence or they're just they're almost inconfident, like they don't need their
Mm-hmm.
emotions. But I feel that they're actually just trying to cover it most of the times. Then you got the other people, probably more like me, who are highly emotional,
Yeah,
and probably allow it sometimes to control me rather than me use it to control my purpose.
yeah.
Um, I mean, how do you and again, this is probably a bigger question than we can have time for, but how do you tap into to both those
Hmm.
polars?
Well, this could be our next
Episode.
episode, but I think that this being able to balance is really central to having a healthy relationship with our emotions. And I think about the metaphor of a river and a dam. And when you dam the river, downstream you have destruction, and upstream you have destruction.
Yeah.
A healthy river will be in a state of flow, and a healthy digestive system, endocrine system, blood system, breathing system, all those things will be healthy in a state of flow. So there's something about feeling it and moving on, feeling it and taking the next steps, and not fighting against it and resisting, not being upstream in the dam where you're wallowing in the feelings, or downstream where it's the river's dried out and you're pretending they're not there. But the healthy state of emotions is flowing.
Balance. Yeah. And then again, that awareness where you go, okay, well, I'm feeling this, and this I can share, or this I don't need to, and this I can use, and this I don't need to. You can start filtering it out there. Otherwise, you're just going to.
There's one more very cool thing, which is that we feel multiple feelings all the time.
Yeah.
And so, again, just going back to parenting, and, you walk in your kid's room and it's just a bomb went off and it's a total disaster, and you're just pulling your hair out, and I've already pulled all mine out. And you're so frustrated. At the same time, you just love them to bits. Those two feelings, they don't cancel each other out. They're both there. And so recognizing the kind of multiplicity of feelings, the depth of our feelings, the layers of our feelings, my favorite question is, what else are you feeling? Not just staying on the surface.
Yeah. Dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
Perfect, Josh Freedman. Thank you for sharing with us. The links to 6seconds.org will be in the show notes. Are there other websites or ways people can connect with you directly, Josh, or is it just through that website?
Absolutely. I'm regularly on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter at EQJosh. But LinkedIn is a good place to connect with me, and also to follow 6 Seconds. We're also on Instagram and
other places,
Facebook as well. So all those places.
Perfect. Well, thank you for coming on. And thank you guys for listening out there. This will be episode 1043 at thehiddenwhy.com. So look it up and have a listen. Josh,
1043.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Several years in the making. Hey,
congratulations.
I get to speak to wonderful people like yourself, Josh, every week.
1042 so far.
Yeah, something like that. So it's good. But thank you for coming on. Appreciate your time. And for everyone listening out there, until next time, peace, passion, and purpose. See you soon.
Bye.